The mess hall of Station Keth 7 hummed with the usual cacophony of 100 different species attempting to coexist. Mireille sat at the far end of a communal table, her tray holding what could only be described as a modest portion: a small protein cube, half a nutrient bar, and a cup of reconstituted broth. To her, it was sufficient. To everyone else in the station, it looked like starvation rations. Across the hall, Security Officer Vrock leaned against the serving counter, his 4 arms crossed over his chitinous chest. He was a Kralix, a species known for consuming nearly twice their body weight daily. The sight of Mireille's tray had become a source of amusement for him and his colleagues over the past 3 weeks. "Look at the human again," Vrock rumbled to his partner, gesturing with one clawed hand. "I've seen emergency rations more generous than that. How does her species even survive?" Officer Thelma, a hulking Brogantine with tusks that could gore through hull plating, snorted in agreement. "Maybe they photosynthesize. Or perhaps they're naturally malnourished. Either way, it's pathetic." Their laughter carried across the mess hall, but Mireille didn't react. She'd learned long ago that explaining human caloric requirements to species who burned through energy like fusion reactors was pointless. She simply ate her meal in silence, reading reports on her datapad, trying to ignore the stares and whispers. What she didn't notice was the table of young ones watching her with growing concern. Scarin was a Velrathi cub, barely 8 cycles old, with silver-gray fur that stood on end when he was agitated. Right now, every strand was bristling. He sat with 3 other cubs from various species, all enrolled in the station's youth education program. They'd been observing the human engineer for days now, and their young minds had reached a unanimous conclusion: Mireille was being starved. "She eats less than my baby sister," whispered Nyx, a Kralix juvenile whose carapace hadn't yet hardened. "And my sister is only 2 cycles old." The security officers laugh at her, added Yori, a small Quellen whose tentacles coiled anxiously around her nutrient flask. "Why doesn't anyone help her?" Scarin's amber eyes narrowed with determination. His parents had taught him that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The human was clearly too weak from hunger to ask for help, too proud to admit her suffering. The adults were too busy mocking her to see the truth. "We have to do something," Scarin declared, his voice carrying the fierce certainty only children possess. The next day, Mireille entered the mess hall at her usual time. She collected her usual modest portion and headed to her usual seat. But before she could take her first bite, a shadow fell across her tray. She looked up to find Scarin standing before her, his meal tray held out like an offering. Without a word, the young Velrathi used his claws to transfer a massive chunk of roasted quelvar, the equivalent of at least 3 human meals, onto her plate. "Wait. I can't," Mireille began, but Scarin had already scampered away. Before she could process what had happened, Nyx approached from the other side. The young Kralix carefully placed 2 protein spheres beside the quelvar. "For you," he chittered in broken universal, then retreated. Then came Yori, depositing a pile of nutrient-rich kelp strips, then a Brogantine child she'd never even spoken to, adding a substantial portion of fungal cake. One by one, the young ones of Station Keth 7 approached Mireille's table, each sacrificing part of their own meal to pile onto her plate. The mess hall had gone silent. Every adult watched in stunned disbelief as the children orchestrated their rescue mission. Mireille's modest tray had transformed into a mountain of food representing a dozen different cuisines and species. Security Officer Vrock stopped laughing. Officer Thelma's tusks seemed to retract slightly in shame. Scarin returned last, carrying the largest piece of marrow-rich bone from his tray, a Velrathi delicacy reserved for special occasions. His small hands trembled slightly as he placed it atop the pile. His amber eyes met Mireille's, and she saw tears forming in them. "You're so small," Scarin whispered, his voice cracking, "and you work so hard fixing our life support, our gravity regulators. You keep us all alive, but nobody feeds you properly." A tear rolled down his furry cheek. "Please eat. Please don't die. We need you." The words hit Mireille like a physical blow. These children, these precious, compassionate children, thought she was dying of starvation. They'd sacrificed their own meals their growing bodies desperately needed because they couldn't bear to watch her suffer any longer. Her throat tightened. She knelt down beside Scarin, bringing herself to eye level with the distraught cub. "Scarin, she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Thank you. Thank you so much for your kindness. But I need you to understand something important about humans. The other cubs gathered around, listening intently. We're small, yes, and we don't need to eat as much as Velrathi or Kralix or Brogantines. Our bodies are different. We evolved on a world where food was sometimes scarce, so we learned to be efficient. What looks like a tiny meal to you is actually perfect for me. Scaren's ears perked up uncertainly. You're not starving? Not even close, Mireille assured him. In fact, if I ate everything you've all given me, I'd be sick for days. My stomach is only about this big. She made a shape with her hands, demonstrating. Nix clicked his mandibles in confusion. But then, why did the security officers laugh at you? Mireille glanced toward Vrock and Thelma, who both had the decency to look away. Because some adults forget what you children know instinctively, that being different doesn't mean being weak, and that kindness matters more than strength. She stood, addressing not just the cubs but the entire silent mess hall. I've worked on 17 stations across 4 sectors. I've been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated at every single one. But never, not once, has anyone shown me the compassion you children demonstrated today. Station Commander Pylix, a dignified Quellan who'd been observing from the officers' table, rose from his seat. His tentacles rippled with emotion as he approached. Engineer Mireille, he said formally, on behalf of Station Keth 7's adult population, I apologize. These children have taught us a valuable lesson about honor, empathy, and the true measure of strength. He turned to address the security officers. Vrock, Thelma, you will each submit formal apologies and attend mandatory cultural sensitivity training. Then, to everyone's surprise, Commander Pylix knelt before the cubs. And to you, young ones, you have demonstrated the finest qualities of any spacefarer. You saw someone in need, you took action, and you did so with courage and selflessness. The Galactic Council itself could learn from your example. The cubs beamed with pride, though Scaren still looked concerned about the mountain of food on Mireille's plate. Mireille smiled and began carefully dividing the portions. Now, since you've all been so generous, how about we share this feast properly? I'll eat what I need, and we'll make sure every bit of your kindness feeds someone who needs it. As the children settled around her table, chattering excitedly and reclaiming their meals, Mireille caught Scaren's eye once more. The young Velrathi's tail wagged slightly, his species equivalent of a smile. Scaren, she said quietly, when I was your age, I was taught that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our stubbornness. It's our capacity for compassion. Today you reminded me that compassion isn't uniquely human, it's universal. Thank you for that gift. The cub's chest puffed with pride, and in that moment, the mess hall of Station Keth 7 transformed from a place of mockery into something far more valuable. A place where differences were celebrated, where vulnerability was met with kindness, and where the smallest voices taught the loudest lessons. Security never laughed at Mireille's portions again. But more importantly, they never laughed at anyone's differences again. The cubs had seen to that.